Okay, so when you hear the word Viking, what actually flashes through your mind? Probably horned helmets, mindless barbarians, swinging axes, and just a trail of absolute destruction along the coastlines, right? It's a pop culture image we've all seen 100 times. But in today's Explainer, we're diving into the source material to show how that Hollywood depiction completely misses the true historical reality. We're going to unpack the staggering transformation of these Scandinavian warriors. We'll see how they went from being brutal raiders to incredibly sophisticated calculating politicians and economic powerhouses who permanently settled the land.
It's a classic bait and switch, really. Yes, there's absolute truth to the visceral legends of figures like Ivar the Boneless, and terrifying concepts like the legendary Blood Eagle execution certainly do appear in the Icelandic sagas. But digging into the history reveals a much deeper, far more interesting story. Their ultimate weapon wasn't just the axe or the sword. It was assimilation. It was trade. It was politics. They were, in fact, incredibly calculating settlers who permanently altered the very fabric of early medieval Britain.
Tracing their strategy chronologically, you see this massive, fundamental shift. Back in the late 8th century, the playbook was pretty simple. Seasonal hit-and-run raids on rich, completely undefended coastal monasteries. They'd grab the treasure and sail back home to farm in Scandinavia. But then, something changes. By the mid-9th century, they start overwintering. They just stop leaving. And this all culminates in 866 AD when the Great Heathen Army, which was this massive, highly organized coalition military force, captures the thriving, heavily defended Roman metropolis of York. That was the definitive moment. That was when they decided to stay and conquer.
So, you might be wondering, how does a foreign army manage to embed itself so deeply? Well, early medieval Britain wasn't a unified country at all. It was this highly fractured mosaic of warring factions and independent kingdoms, places like Wessex, Mercia, and Northumbria. There was absolutely no central king calling the shots. And the Vikings brilliantly exploited this divided political landscape. They didn't just fight everyone blindly. They forged highly calculated, totally unlikely alliances. For example, they teamed up with the Cornish to attack their mutual neighbor, the Kingdom of Wessex. It just goes to show they were highly observant, strategic players playing 3D chess with local rivalries to get the absolute upper hand.
And this strategy wasn't just about battlefield alliances. We're talking high-stakes diplomacy, too. A perfect example of this is the Codex Aureus. This was an absolutely stunning, highly venerated 8th century gospel book. The Vikings stole it during a raid, but, and here's the kicker, they didn't just destroy it. They recognized its immense cultural and financial value to the Anglo-Saxons, and they successfully ransomed it back to an English alderman and his wife. The written inscription detailing this whole transaction proves they engaged in lucrative, really complex negotiations. They knew exactly what they were doing and how to extract maximum value from their enemies.
Section 1. York, a global trade hub and building an empire on commerce.
Taking York was a masterpiece of timing. They actually launched their attack on All Saints' Day, effectively decapitating the royal leadership in one fell swoop. But why York? Because it was an absolute economic gold mine. When archaeologists excavated the famous Coppergate site there, they didn't just find your standard early medieval English items. They uncovered cowrie shells brought all the way from the Indian Ocean, silver coins minted in Central Asia, and literal silk from the East. And right alongside those were locally manufactured items like deer antler columns and leather shoes. Once the Vikings settled, they rapidly transformed York into a highly sophisticated global trade hub, connecting local British artisans directly to the ancient Silk Roads. Because this commerce, this trade, was exactly what cemented their lasting, permanent settlement in England.
But to truly understand their economic engine, we have to look at the grim reality behind this commerce. Selling furs or silver was profitable for sure, but human beings were an incredibly precious commodity. Because the Vikings were so heavily integrated into global trade, they acted as crucial go-betweens in the vastly profitable international slave trade of the 9th and 10th centuries. Taking captives wasn't just some random byproduct of war, it was a deliberate, calculated economic strategy. They needed portable wealth to fund their political and territorial ambitions, and this was how they got it.
Section 2. Cultural blending and assimilation, merging two worlds together.
With all that vast wealth and permanent settlement came the inevitable blending of societies. And this brings us to a massive linguistic wow moment. You might think assimilation is just, adopting local farming customs or sharing a few recipes. But the Vikings literally rewired the English language. Before they arrived, Old English speakers used pronouns more like he and him to describe groups of people. But the words they, them, and their, literally some of the most fundamental everyday words you and I are using right this second, are actually Old Norse loanwords. for core grammatical words to completely replace native ones. That tells us these two peoples integrated on a massive, intimately social level.
And we can physically see this fusion in the historical record, too. Take the Ormside Bowl. This isn't just an Anglo-Saxon bowl, and it's not just a Viking bowl. It is this stunning, intricate dialogue between two distinct metalwork styles. English metalworkers were taking direct inspiration from Scandinavian designs, and vice versa. It's incredible, tangible proof that the hard, violent boundaries between these two separate cultures were increasingly and beautifully blurring together through craftsmanship.
This integration went way beyond language and art. It extended right into the incredibly important realm of religion. In 878 AD, after a massive conflict, the Viking leader Guthrum surrenders to the English king Alfred the Great. And as part of the peace treaty, Guthrum agrees to be baptized as a Christian. Now, initially that sounds like the ultimate defeat, doesn't it? But actually scratch that. For leaders like Guthrum, baptism was an incredibly strategic tool. Becoming Christian allowed him to embed himself into European culture and utilize the highly organized bureaucratic structure of the church to actually govern his new territory in East Anglia. It was a completely calculated move to integrate and exercise legitimate political power.
Section 3. The Law of the Conquerors. From lawless raiders to lawmakers.
Think about it. You simply cannot maintain an expanding settlement, manage complex international trade networks reaching all the way to Asia, and govern a massive mixed population through pure chaotic violence. You need a deeply ingrained sense of order. Enter the Thing. This was the ingenious Viking mechanism for public assembly. When you have a decentralized warrior society, family blood feuds are a huge risk. They can spiral out of control and tear an entire community apart. The Thing provided a structured, legal space for frank negotiation and dispute resolution. It allowed complex problems to be debated openly, applying the peer pressure of the entire community to settle arguments peacefully. It shows us they were deeply, fundamentally invested in maintaining justice within their settlements.
We constantly picture Vikings making up rules at the absolute edge of an axe. Yet here's the ultimate historical irony. The modern English word law itself actually derives entirely from Old Norse. Just let that sink in for a second. The very concept of legal order that we name today comes directly from the people history loves to remember as chaotic, rule-breaking barbarians. They were, in absolute truth, meticulous lawmakers.
This deep commitment to their own legal structure resulted in the creation of the Danelaw. This wasn't just a couple of isolated villages. We are talking about a massive, distinct wedge of Scandinavian-controlled territory carved right into the heart of early England. Within this massive boundary, society operated entirely under Danish law and custom, completely separate from the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Wessex. They fundamentally redrew the political map of the 9th and 10th centuries, establishing a permanent geographical space where their culture and their rules were the absolute norm.
And the physical, demographic impact of this permanent settlement was just vast. Think about the number 300. That's the number of individuals found packed into a massive, highly visible Viking burial mound at a churchyard in Repton. Modern tooth isotope analysis proves these weren't just local English farmers, these were men from Scandinavia and even further afield, all gathered together in this monumental site. They weren't just passing through on a raid anymore. Putting all that incredible effort into constructing this massive burial mound was a deliberate, bold statement. They were leaving a massive, permanent mark on the physical landscape, officially claiming it as their own.
So all of this leaves us with a really provocative question to wrap up this explainer. Did the Anglo-Saxons eventually defeat the Vikings? Or did the Vikings simply become us? Yes, a unified English kingdom eventually emerged in the 10th century to push back the Danes, but the Scandinavian footprint was already permanently cemented into the ground. As we've seen, their legacy wasn't washed away by history, it was completely absorbed. They live on invisibly in the global trade cities they built, the laws we follow, the physical landscape, and literally the very words we speak today. I really hope this deep dive into the source material has completely changed how you view the Viking Age. Thanks for learning with me.